Azkuna zentroa Alondiga Bilbaok ongi etorria ematen dizue Gutun Zuria Bilbao letren nazioarteko jaialdira. Ondoren, El periodismo cuenta, la ficción no inventa solasaldia izango da Lucía Lijtmaer idazle eta kultur kritikariaren eta Brenda Navarro soziologo, ekonomista eta idazlearen artean. Bi idazleek erabiltzen dute idazketa esplorazio formaleko eta aktivismoko ekintza gisa. Jakintza literarioaren eta liburutik beste esparru batzuetara ateratzeko desioaren ekintza gisa. Mesedez, itzali telefono mugikorrak eta gozatu elkarrizketaz. Azkuna Zentroa Alondiga Bilbao os da la bienvenida a Gutun Zuria Bilbao, Festival Internacional de las Letras. A continuación tendrá lugar la conversación titulada El periodismo cuenta, la ficción no inventa, entre la escritora y crítica cultural Lucía Lijtmaer y la socióloga, economista y también escritora Brenda Navarro. Las escritoras comparten la escritura como un acto de exploración formal y de activismo, de saber literario y de deseo de salir del libro hacia otros ámbitos. Por favor, es el momento de apagar los teléfonos móviles y disfrutar de la conversación. Azkuna Zentroa Alondiga Bilbao welcomes you to Gutun Zuria Bilbao International Literature Festival. Now we present the conversation El periodismo cuenta, la ficción no inventa between the writer and cultural critic Lucía Lijtmaer and the sociologist, economist and writer Brenda Navarro. The writers share writing as an act of formal exploration and activism, of literary knowledge and the desire to leave books behind for other fields. Please, it's time to turn off your mobile phones and enjoy the conversation.
No os vemos nada.
No vemos nada en absoluto.
We can't see anything. Good afternoon. Thanks very much for joining us. We don't have a chair. We're gonna improvise. I think both of us are very happy to be here. Thanks very much for the invitation. The title of this conversation is Journalism Narrates, Fiction Does Not Invent. This title is gonna guide us through our conversation. Earlier, before we came on stage, we were talking. Brenda, myself, and I was remembering a book called True Fictions, Ficciones Verdaderas, from Eloy Tomás Martínez. And this is a compilation, a collection, where he compiles the facts and then how those were taken to fiction. In the book, he collects the journalism chronicle of some young people that escaped, two lovers that eloped, and then how Lorca, based on that, wrote Bodas de Sangre. Eloy Martínez says that fiction materializes, crystallizes something that in nonfiction doesn't happen in that same very way. What's your take on this, Brenda? Well, very easy to answer. We were discussing this backstage, and we also reflected on the highly controversial title of this conversation. Yes, I agree. Reality is like the commodity raw material of narration itself. Or fiction as creators. I always reflect on the concept of creation and how humanity becomes humanity from the moment we start creating a story. And in our society is an ideation of God that created us, and a God that sins, and this gave a certain sense of meaning to life. And then, well, we shape this narration, but also always taking reality as the raw material. And And then we transfer this reality into fiction, and this helps us shape ourselves and shape society. Reality narrates, and fiction does not invent it, but it creates meaning. We were given 15 minutes to discuss these topics with a journalist, and we were talking about how we should introduce ourselves to the audience and how the audience looks at us, and the idea that you will have or your impression of us as writers. Today we're gonna introduce ourselves as writers. And we're thinking, well, who is entitled to be on stage and to address an audience? This is also part of a narrative. We are not aware of the space where we're gonna be placed, and we were supposed to, follow an approach, and I'm sure you feel comfortable as I do. Do you feel comfortable? That's a good question. When I'm narrated as a writer, I feel more and more comfortable. As you were saying, there's something performative in this idea of writers, and also being here with you. Oh. What's interesting I don't really focus on that distinction. The idea of narrating is telling a story. While you narrate, you're adopting a perspective. You're deciding to focus on something specific and not another thing within one piece of news or fact or what interests you. All narration is deceiving, it's tricky, and I feel uncomfortable in how we naturalize that what we do seems normal, but is far from normal. The fact that during months and months you sit and think about fictional characters, a fictional world, and then you live, and then you tell people that during X hours a day you're narrating something that's in your mind. Can we describe this as an occupation, or rather an illness? It's delirious to some extent. In my first interviews, they asked me, why do you want to be a writer? And I felt like when I was a 5th grader, I always said, I don't know. Sometimes I said, because I learned that lying could be an occupation. This is space and you can lie, and that's perfectly okay. And that's beautiful. And going back to that concept of the creation of characters, I'd like to share something. For example, when I was writing Ceniza en la Boca in chapter 3, I'm going to spoil it, but on the first paragraph of the book, Diego, the brother of the main character, commits suicide, and the third character, the main character, becomes aware of that death. And I remember that when I was writing it, I was very much into the character, and I finished that third chapter, and I was very much moved by my own story. So I stood up, I went to my daughter's room. She was a teenager then, and I told her, I'm going to sit here with you. And she was, well, okay, if you shall will. And she asked me, "What's wrong with you?" And I told her, "Well, one of my characters died." And she turned back to me and told me, "Mom, but you killed him." And it's true. But that's not how I lived it. Probably that has happened to you as well with some of your characters. And yes, it's true that the person who lives with me while I write is, well, sometimes flips out because there are moments in which, as with everything, there are cases in which I've been sitting down and then I say, "Well, it's so cold in New England." And the other person perhaps is drinking a gazpacho. It's July and it's really hot outside. Or when you ask yourself, what kind of skirts did they, wear back then? Well, of course, this is part of the documentation process. But you need to imagine yourself in that space, in that moment in time, with those characters. But before I was a writer, a fiction writer, there was a time in which I translated travel books. So when you have to translate restaurants, you get hungry. You're there salivating. And when you're, writing about the Michelin-starred restaurant, I remember that one day, once I was asked to talk about trips in Norway, and I was in Mexico, and I felt frustrated because of the idea of being locked up in my house writing about another place. I was almost like inventing that I would go to Norway and tasting the best Norwegian wine. This is also part of lying all the time. And I like to go back to this idea of lies. Earlier, we were saying that reality makes us feel that we cannot flow because we think that if we betray reality, particularly when we talk about true facts, there's a very fine line in which we not only need to think about the construction of our world that we're building, but what's going to happen for those that are involved. I think you want to share an anecdote. I've worked both on actual current events, real events, things that happen to people that are still alive, and I've also worked with fictions. Full fictions, 100% fictional content. And I advise you and recommend you to work with 100% fiction, because there's a sense of responsibility when someone trusts his life, his memories, his story. Janet Malcolm says that doing journalism is unjustifiable as an occupation because there's always a manipulation of events. Well, much could be said, but the good thing about fiction is that if you want to bring an elephant along, you can do so. You can toy around with the ideas. And the anecdote that I wanted to share is that in Cauterio, although some of the characters are from the 17th century, I fictionalized an encounter between two real characters. And at the end of the book, and this is not a spoiler by the way, I say that these are the chronicles that are in the public library of the Congress. It's not true. Some people went to the Spanish Congress to look for the chronicles. But I thought that it'd be interesting to create this potential possible world. And I'd like to ask you, you work in full, absolute fiction. How do you coexist with the idea of literality? because sometimes people think that what you narrate happened to you. For example, with Casas Vacías, people ask me, but are you a mom? As if being a mom entitled me to talk about motherhood. And with Ceniza en la Boca, the first interviews in different spaces always were, well, tell me about the suicide of your brother. And I told them, no, I have no brother who has committed suicide, but I'm interested in this. And I gave the journalist the explanation. And then they told me, well, as a migrant woman in Spain, tell me your experience. And I always like to, exercise the right to fiction and to lie, precisely because of a matter of responsibility. Of course, I, get and select chunks of reality. I'm very much interested in migrations and politics. But if I personalize this in someone, and I think, well, why would this person want to be the subject of a narration? It's if people would, take pictures of you and then share the pictures without asking you. And I always say that an image, a word can move you, but what you have to do is focus on that feeling, that emotion, and transform it into something different to reality, that is. When we were walking towards the hotel, we were talking about Truman Capote, and we've been taught that after Cold Blood, well, that's the book that has described how true facts have to be narrated. And I was thinking, and Roberto Wolf's massacre operation, and that is based on true events, and the point of view, the perspective is very, very important. With Truman Capote, In Cold Blood, we're thinking about the mind of the person, whereas in Operación Massacre operation, we're thinking about what happens to the victims. And there's a decision there on how reality is transformed into an aesthetic, a literary artifact. And also the point of view is extremely important. The perspective. Yes, I agree. I like that comparison because I was thinking when I was listening to you that Truman Capote does the opposite exercise. He comes from the world of novels, fictions, and decides to take a real event to invent the non-fiction novel. It's like a dead who's alive, because one may think either it's novel or it's non-fiction, and he treats the real event as a fiction. And then the next generation, the Tom Wolfes, these were journalists that wanted to be novelists and used their space in the newsroom to, inspire themselves on real events, and then, sophisticate those true events and transform them into something worthy. There's much about ego here, and I believe that it's really a matter of ego. They wanted to stand out, to distinguish themselves. The great American novel seems to have disappeared, right? Because in the 70s or the 60s, there was like the major topic. But now we don't have that. We have realities that are much more segmented. And now there's no goal of, trying to create the great novel of the 21st century that touches upon all the universal topics. Well, it's quite patriarchal to think that since I'm going to write the great novel encompassing all topics, and perhaps I'm going to be validated as someone who knows how to narrate and to tell reality. And this is something that I myself can't stand. People thinking that we as writers need to issue an opinion on absolutely everything. And there's a trap here, and this is something that we were discussing earlier. Seems that there are some authoritative voices. We as writers have these voices, so they want us to build truths, and those truths are going to be narrated, are going to be transmitted, and will have narrative echoes that are going to build X or Y. And this brings me back to the idea of journalism. I don't like to make the distinction myself, but right now I believe that we need a great deal of journalism, investigative journalism that talks about real events that are taking place, because everything that is published in the media is, news, and sometimes they say if this newspaper said so, it's true. And they don't want us as readers to develop critical thought and go beyond the headline and to beyond the social media. And I think fiction here helps us a great deal. Well, you discuss some very interesting ideas. You touch upon very interesting ideas. As you were saying, there's fiction, then there's non-fiction. Sometimes it's combative, deliberately or not. It's interesting how people sometimes ask us about whether it's contemporaneous or not. Problem is that sometimes novels are interpreted or received as essays. If I write on this, or you write on this topic, people then see it as a very specific opinion on that specific topic. For example, with Cauterio, they asked me a lot about leftist politicians, if they're machists. Of course, they are. But this is a novel. This is a literary choice that I made. Many times it's much more emotional than rational. And when I'm interviewed, well, of course, the journalists are, on the lookout for headlines. They want, headlines that can be a hook and that can be a clickbait that they're looking for. And they want to label you as the feminist writer, for example. And what you were saying regarding journalism is so interesting, because regretfully, very good investigative journalism is being done on the radio and in the press, but people don't read it, and since they don't read it, they don't pay for it. And it's much cheaper to do or write opinion ads. In that case, you don't need to do research, you don't need to travel to Guatemala or Cuenca to document yourself. And this is something that we also need to consider as readers, because we're also readers. We're not just writers that are critical with what surrounds us. There's a saturation of reality. And in your opinion, what happens? Why is it that there's this feeling of literality? Well, the first person is associated to the author. And second, there is a search for escapism in the literary creation. I mean, people read to escape. I also read to forget about reality, to evade myself. Yes, and Sally Rooney's new novel is very much about it. Yes, I'm gonna go back to this idea of authorship and the first person narrator. I don't know if this has happened to you, but they tell us, or they ask us often, This happens to you and they take things for granted. But this is very much related to what I was saying at the beginning, which is the fact that some canons are built in society that establish that he's a plumber because he does plumbing, he's a baker because he bakes, he's a writer because he writes.
But the women are writers, when we write in first person, this was the case in Mexico, for me, the critics, those that decide who are worth to be read or not and to be mentioned in their different cultural magazines. First of all, they criticize that I write in the first person, because up until you don't know how to make narrative, we'll see whether you will be able to really keep a story. But I feel that this is also related to this prejudice that they have, that women, we write a female literature and things about women. So this is always like a kind of testimony, and they are sort of neglect that. And sometimes when this is about men, and when they are witnessing something and there is investigative journalist and it is made by men, then this is real, this is worth it. And when we try to do it on the first person, or doing it from our emotions, or also sort of saying what we feel, or as in fiction through letters, they always have this feeling that, well, yeah, she's doing it quite well. And like some weeks ago, because I often tweet, I was asking, so why do men, when they need to talk about women, they talk about that women? So I am a man and I have to teach a workshop and I need to make a living and to make money to eat. So that's very good. They need to eat, so they have to have a full up fridge. But let's talk about Wolf. Let's talk about Plath, and if they committed suicide, so much better. Yeah, let's talk about those that are no longer here. Let's vindicate those things, because they're unable to look at us, to read us, and to consider us as equals. And Rita Moreno told me, well, they also do that with researchers whenever they want to have a reaper or a benchmark. That other person that is sort of dialogating with me, talking with me, it's always a dead woman. This is very much related to what we are saying, because this is a reality. As long as they want to talk, they want to talk to that women, well, this also makes people think that dead women are important. And then feminicides are more sort of okay, because it's not like she died, she got killed. So we get into this narrative that these bodies are exposed of women and all the violence that is behind the feminicide and this super sexist society, you know, sort of turns into a rule, because we start like making a joke. If you write on the first person, you're not a writer, but we end up having social issues because we reproduce those narratives that sort of keep us talking about the same things constantly, as if the reality wasn't any broader. Well, yes, the thing is, on the one hand, there's this use of the first person that is sort of not well seen when it is used by a woman. But if it's a man talking about his paternity, then maybe it is 8 books about the same thing. If it was me talking about my maternity, they would go like, who's this crazy woman talking about your dead father or your maternity in 8 books? And then there is a status, this canonic status that is always male. It's always masculine. So this kind of, we're always doing like second class literature. Then there's this dialogue with dead women, and this goes for any other field in life. Whenever the right-wing men, they say, I like Clara Campoamor as a feminist. Oh, I say, yeah, sure. How here? How amazing. It's really tiring also, the fact that in that constant fight to be acknowledged as writers in front of those standard critics, we have this idea of then making kind of a joke of us, like, well, these little ladies doing little things. I don't know, one day something big will happen. Well, until we are dead. And then they will talk about us. And then these that I refuse, I no longer attend conferences where they ask us to talk about women and literature, women and sports, women and science, women and astronauts, as if this was a couple that is absolutely impossible to, or those elements that are impossible to sort of link together, you know. They should rather say, okay, let's explore female characters or our industry, but women and, no, I refuse that. And this is like a sub-classification within a festival. This has happened to all of us, and you reach a moment when you say, like, no more. Yes, on March the 8th, again, they're going to look for us, so they make us talk, and now many of us, we've made the decision of saying, no, you do your work. I'm not going to be there for you. And then there's also a way to evade from reality. Talking about fiction, how we create, what we create, etc. I think it is also important to discuss about this with you, because I think we only meet away from Madrid. So let's take advantage of this moment to also share this moment in life with all of the other writers. I don't know if you've been sort of questioning yourself that we have this idea of talking about things that we like, that move us, that is provoking to us. But let's think about how we get away from official narrative about being hopeless. I'm always told that you write about things that are hopeless. Isn't there anything else? And I always answer, well, because there's something else. This is why I feel that these stories are sort of full of lack of hope, because if this is the only reality we live in, then we will not be able to compare and to be able to say we could live or love in another way, inhabit this world in a different way. And now I am wondering on, I don't know if I would ever be able to write like Nick Hornby. I mean, to write something that will make the world laugh. I don't want to make the world cry, but I don't know whether I will succeed, because I just like sit in front of my laptop and I write, and my daughter is there laughing at me. But I consider, how could I write about the pain, about how I get time out of my life to talk about that? How can I make it so this is not a repetition of the same problems and issues that we are sort of always sort of doomed to talk about, that are endless? And then I moved back to this title, that the fiction doesn't invent. So I wonder whether fiction is going to help us not to write happy stories. No, don't do that, please. Not to write beautiful stories, but rather to try to create something else that will sort of help us get away from the narrative that we are always sort of embedded in. So we're again talking about men. Yeah, we should leave them aside. So when you start writing about something, do you also sort of wonder, am I contributing to repeating myself and also to repeating the discourses where we are told that we should be part of? Well, this is a very good question. If I wonder that, well, this happens to you, as you said, that you'd like to write something funny. I think that rather than being conditioned by these boxes where they want to sort of put us in my particular case, is my subconscious that really conditions me. I think that writing is a process that is rather more, it's never a decision like, I'm going to write about this. This is a super good idea. No, it's rather about something that has been sort of boiling in my head for a while, and then I decide to tackle it. I love also to write a choral novel with many characters, with different viewpoints, each one, and then I end up writing about dead people and people that are buried, and blood, and women taking revenge. We mentioned the idea of a fiction. My mom, when she read Coterie, Cauterio, she was crying. She was like, I thought I brought you up to be happy. No, mom, it's okay. It's not me. It's a fiction. Now I am writing something where I am pulling the teeth out of, putting them out of people. I never try to challenge these classifications because I really enjoy doing what I do. I try not to repeat a story with the two characters. My challenge is rather about how I articulate the book. Whether I can really get somewhere else without the reader getting lost. So I think a way to refuse critics or to be sort of classified in a box as they want us to be is just to not pay attention to it. So if you want to write like Nick Horby, go for it. Well, I wish, well, I cannot do it. Well, in Mexico, we say, I can do this dish, I can cook this perfectly well. And what you say there about how you build your stories, I am a writer about characters. I need to know what is going to happen to that woman at the end. I need to know what her conflict is about and how she's going to live it. I need to know what is going to happen to that character, not really caring about the story itself. And then I build a story as I go, and things happen to this woman, and she tells me, now I need a brother, or now I need a son to be stolen from me. Well, these are the things my characters ask from me. What you want. That's how they are. And I always try to make these characters complex, and now I wonder since I already told what's happened, how I'm going to keep the story going so that readers keep on reading it, and also so that I'm satisfied because I kept alive the story. But I am really focused on a character. I don't think I'm going to talk about maternity or about motherhood or about immigration or about suicide. No, I have an image. I have maybe something that is sort of disturbing me, and then you decide to talk about it. How do you create your stories? Well, it depends. Sometimes I start with a scene, a very particular scene, where there are some characters that might evolve and turn into the main characters, or they end up disappearing, but the situation remains. And then also that situation sort of provokes questions. there was this woman that was buried, then there was a woman in Ireland, and there were 3 characters, then I killed one of them. In Almost Nothing to Wear, Casi Nada que Ponerte, this was a story about 2 people that I knew since I was very young, and I found them amazing. And I wanted to, in a very naive way, I thought I was going to tell their story as if they were somehow the story of Argentina. That with them you could move from the 70s up to current times. Then things change suddenly. In Casi Nada que Ponerte, then there was a play that was made out of it. There were interviews. There are many things inside this book. And there I had also the intention, because of everything that I've read, like Manuel Puig, is very important to me. Sometimes it is not only women, as we said previously, but also sexual dissidences. Some men were also very much sort of criticized because they were talking about soap operas, about pop culture humor, and pop culture is something that really the standard people or the academy does not like. Yes, but we're talking about women, because if they are men and they are filthy rich, it's okay. Bargallo says he strongly criticized Manuel Puig. And I think these sort of shows gets into what you do. I mean, it's what you read, what interests you. I think it was very much influenced by Pedro Lemebel. Pedro Lemebel and Copy are people that dared doing what they felt, not following the standard, the rules. They would break limits, especially Copy more than Lebedel. In a grotesque way. But you have to adapt to that, understand what he is proposing. But when I have to build stories, Tengo Miedo Torero, it's like always a reference because of the rhythm. To me, Agatha Christie, to me, was the most important writer in Europe. But sometimes when I get stuck, because I also like a lot the pace, the rhythm, I always go back to Tengo Miedo Torero because it's a way of playing with the worlds, turning them upside down and making poetry. Because I am sure he would not say, I'm now going to talk against the world. No, it just sort of flew out of him. And I think that was important for our generation. It is not a queer reference, but I think Latin America could not have been what it is if we didn't have Lemebel as a reference. Now, when you're talking about a performance, I wrote a prologue, and when I wrote that and it was being reviewed, somebody said, you wrote prologue because we don't use it in Spanish. Oh, sorry, can you remove the word performance because it's not in Spanish? And they say, of course not. We are all using performance. So, talking back about Lebedel, this is a writer that I think we should all be reading what we want to know about political dissidence, and also when we want to see something with a good rhythm, a good pace. We always end up traveling to the south. Well, I like it. We don't know where we're going to be together again, so let's take advantage of the situation to tackle everything we like. We're talking about the construction of narratives. I'm not flattering anybody. I think both of us, we were saying this is very well organized. I mean, how they are narrating themselves as a city and in creation culture and in the creation of culture. So if somebody is here writing a press release, I think they should also mention this, because I think that the first time we met, they asked us, how do you see Barcelona from different points of view? You being local from Barcelona and me through character. We were asking how they narrate Barcelona, and I think if somebody's writing a press release, I think they should consider how, when we are invited to a festival like this one, when you get to a place that is not yours, there's also a narrative and you want to be part of it, and some people that are within that narrative are not even aware of it. Yes, now I'm thinking that the first time that we talked, I think we got together to talk about urban planning, because we were both talking about running away from Madrid to Barcelona, and in another case, the other way around. And then we end up meeting here in Bilbao. Long life Bilbao. This must mean something. I know that Katisha Aguirre is here in the audience, so I want to mention again that when Katisha and myself, we were invited to talk, you don't know what about. You cannot guess what we were invited to talk about. Well, about motherhood. We were invited and we were trying to talk about the creative process, because they never ask us about our creative process. And I tried to socialize it and to share it, and I learned from you. And I remember this because Katisha and myself, we got to narrative, trying to sort of escape from the fact that we were asked to talk about motherhood, and the process of creation is always a source of joy for us. When you say, well, you have to face an empty page, do you think you're going to be inspired by a muse? Well, sometimes, even when you are washing your dishes, you might get inspiration. And sometimes, if you live in New England, there it is very cold. And then when you sit down and start writing, you really enjoy it. So we were trying to be provocative, and we said that this creative process was very interesting to us. Same as when you are going to when you are going to date somebody, you know. So your narrative is, I'm trying to make myself very pretty, I'm going to wear very sexy underwear. So this is how you perform yourself, how you build yourself, and you enjoy it. And then when you're really enjoying it, then it's really fun. And I think this process of creation should be like that. When we have this chance of writing and to devote, we have the chance to devote time, sometimes without being paid for it, to write. And I think what we should do is create also this narrative of joy. So when we're talking about ourselves, when we're talking about other women, and about like really capturing reality, we should not forget that, at least in this society, something they cannot take away from us is this desire to want to enjoy. Yes, I think there's also this mystic about the idea of writing. As you said previously, this idea of this tortured poet, or the dead women that you mentioned, men that were wise men or genius. I think in every process Some parts of it are not that nice, but to me, the act of writing is super beautiful. And there's no comparison, there's nothing as good. Maybe only having a cold beer after this talk might be as good. But you know, you have that joy and that possibility of sitting down to write. I think this is like as if you are seeking a radio show, and then when you are playing with you finally you're playing with a dialing, and you finally tuning to the right show, and the show is about yourself. Yes, this is like having a date with your computer. So you're all in the darkness, and I think we have some minutes to listen to you. Well, I don't know how we can give you the floor. I think you've got to raise your hands and get a microphone.
Vale. Hola, buenas tardes.
Hola.
Hola.
No me veo influenciado por las últimas...
I had already this question in my mind, and last Wednesday, Rosa Montero and Gemma were talking about the creative process, and to them these were real ideas, and to Gemma this was like a storm of words and that she had to sort of order. So you said you would like to talk about your creative process. Could you please share with us how you deal with an idea when it comes to you? I think we've already mentioned this. A journalist once asked me, what type of a pencil do you use? What type of a paper? And I said, no, I use a computer. But I need music. Some other people, they need it quiet. But this is something that you are not aware of until your unconscious sort of tells you how you do it. And I said, well, I need a music. I need some kind of music that sort of makes me think of my corporeal memory. Because when you're listening to something, you sort of think of that moment that was a special moment for you. So this is like your body telling you how it was. And also I like music when it's got lyrics. So I've got this universe of words flowing above me, and when my creative process stops, then maybe I listen to the lyrics and I pick up a word and I say, okay, I will use it. Well, in my case, it depends. Sometimes there is an idea that is turning around, maybe an idea or an image or a text that it's inspiring for me. I cannot write with music. If there are, maybe it's only acoustic, but not with lyrics. For example, now I'm writing about the 90s, so I play a playlist with music from the 90s. So I have to sort of find the right narrative voice, maybe one or two. And sometimes I write 40 pages and unfortunately only 3 are good. But that is the time that I need up until sort of get going. This is how I want to tell the story. This is a character. This is a voice I am going to be using. And then the order depends on different things. In Cauterio, it was a mapping. In some other books, it was like maybe a character. Those I have a blackboard, big blackboard, and there. Like, you know, in films where we see the FBI people talking about their cases with post-its and things and stickers. And I have a question for both of you about characters. Do you know exactly where you want your characters to go when you start writing? Brenda, you said no, you let them ask you for a brother or some other things. But do you have an idea of where you're taking the character? And something else, I am doing a creative workshop, and they really tell us constantly everything has to be coherent. And I ask, why? Why in those universes you are creating as you feel like, why everything should be coherent? How is it to really put you away from the world where you are living, because we all live in our bubbles, but how can you sort of abstract yourself from your emotions? Whenever I'm asked in this workshop to write a short story, I can never make it short. I always end up sort of vindicating my ideas, or I find characters because I know they're going to talk about these things. So what is the piece of advice you could give me? I need to write when I know what is going to happen to character. In Empty Houses, I knew she was going to lose a child and was going to steal another one. And this is not a spoiler, but in another book, I knew this is how it starts, this is how it ends. So I need to know how the character is going to evolve before I write everything else, because that is what is really interesting to me. So this is a bit like when you say coherent. I don't know whether when you talk about coherence or realmente, it's because it's got to be sort of credible or realistic. And sometimes something has to be true to life, because maybe we're talking about two water glasses are going to drop and are going to create chaos in this theater, but then it's okay, it's credible. But then if we talk about a unicorn flying into this theater, that is not that plausible. So what I really like is, on the other hand, them to be very non-coherent. So maybe the universe feels very real, is very true to life, but then you create at the same time within the characters many contradictions. So when you read it, you feel like this has been done by me, my mom, my sisters. And I think it is good to make these political speeches. But what you cannot do is sort of tell readers off. Because when they take a book, they want to get into the story, but not to be told off. Well, about where characters end. I usually write the first and the last chapters first, because I need to know how it ends and how you get there. That might change. But this is the way I like it, and it works for me. Sometimes when characters suffer, in the case of Cauterio, I knew she could take revenge. So the fact that it was already written, that was sort of put me more at ease. And then about coherence. Yes, this is really related to making the story be credible. It only has to be coherent about the characters, mainly the main character. Have serious issues on how to make a text flow when something is a bit different. Sometimes publishers, they want them to be so coherent that sometimes some subjects are more weird in terms of its form, less conventional, and we have to there more, especially here in Spain, because in Latin America, I think this weird ways of narrating is more acceptable than here. For example, in Cauterio, for a long time, my publishers, they were really respectful. But I talk in a chapter that the character, she has an addiction for the House of Fragrance by Zara. And something should happen in every chapter. And I defend incoherence from that point of view, narrative and incoherence, but just because the joy of it, because we also have the right to do as we feel, we're writers. Yes, because if we're not going to reach the canon, anyway, the standard, we might as well do whatever we feel like doing. Who wants to reach the standard? Nobody. And this is it. We call this a conference. Thank you very much.